2018 marks the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the People's Republic of China and Japan. How should we describe the current relations between China and Japan? A continuous rivalry or unlikely partners? Last year, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sent Chinese President Xi Jinping a letter via a high-level emissary of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party suggesting a resumption of regular summit meetings. Is summit diplomacy possible in 2018? What are the obstacles? US President Donald Trump hailed the importance of the Japan-US alliance and called Japan a treasured partner during his visit to the country in late 2017.
There has never been such a close relationship between the leaders of these two countries, Japan and the United States.
What role does the US play in Sino-Japanese relations? Prime Minister Abe unveiled the concept of an Asia Democratic Security Diamond to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific region. What does the future hold for Sino-Japanese relations under Abe's Indo-Pacific strategy?
40 years ago, the Peace and Friendship Treaty reset the Sino-Japanese relationship. However, disputes over the Diaoyu Islands, the Japanese government's ambiguous acceptance of the historical war crimes like the Nanjing Massacre, and the use of comfort women in World War II, coupled with official visitations to the Yasukuni Shrine, still soured relations. Tensions have been heightened by frequent Chinese military training exercises around the Sea of Japan. Presently, governmental exchanges and mutually beneficial economic cooperation maintain cordial bilateral ties. How do we evaluate the current and the future Sino-Japanese relations? Will Japan's participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative strengthen ties? And how will the US-Japanese alliance influence Sino-Japanese engagement? To discuss these issues and more, today I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Rong Ying, who is the Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, and by Andy Mock, who is the Managing Director of Red Pagoda Resources. We shall also speak to Professor Takasato Watanabe of Dorchester University via telephone in Kyoto. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. The year 2018, this new year, is very meaningful for the bilateral relationship between China and Japan. But are you cautiously optimistic or the other way around?
Oh yeah, I think in general I'm quite cautious about the relationship.
Cautiously optimistic, or pessimistic?
Optimistic, yeah. Cautiously optimistic about the overall trajectory or trend of a relationship between the two most important neighbors. And I think, as you rightly said, that this year marks the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Peace and Friendship Treaty between China and Japan. And that was based on actually another important document we call the joint communique between China and Japan for normalizing relations.
How many official documents laid the groundwork for the bilateral relationship starting from the 1970s? Perhaps?
Altogether, we're talking about the 4 most important political documents that they form the political foundation of the relation. But of course, the 4 principled agreement between China and Japan that agreed in November 2014 is also important because it reiterates the importance, the spirit and the principle of these 4 political documents, which constitute the political foundation for stable and healthy relationship between China and Japan.
And an observer from outside China, what do you make of the nature of this most important bilateral relationship in Northeast Asia?
Well, I'm more optimistic than cautious on this, and I think that the reason for this optimism is that while, despite the difficult and troubled past between China and Japan, and this makes me think of what William Faulkner, in describing the American South, said that the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. And to a degree, I think that's been true of the China-Japan relationship, that the past still very much animates a lot of the relationship. I think that being said, with Abe securing a new term, with Xi Jinping in this new era, that there's a lot of room for optimism that these historical problems can be put behind us, and with both countries looking forward to a bright and jointly prosperous future, there really is a lot of room for optimism.
If you look at the public opinions and the results of public opinion polls, well over 80% in each country are pretty negative about the other side, given our serious disputes on territorial claims as well as history. Now let me cross over to Professor Takasato Watanabe with the Dorchester University for his first-hand account about whether he shares the optimistic sentiments here or the other way around. Hello.
Hello, thank you for your calling.
Can I have your quick assessment about the the proposed improvement of this relationship in the new year?
Yes, China, Japan, and the United States are three biggest economic entities of the world. So if these three can go hand in hand, the prosperity of economics and also stability of the politics would be easily realized. However, some forces inside Japan and also Trump administration want to make some troubles among the three Asian nations, China, South Korea, and Japan. This is the first problem. But another problem is, as you have pointed out, historical understanding between China, Japan, and South Korea. So these are very deeply rooted in the public opinions, and especially in Japan. The media, manipulated a little bit by Abe administration, is utilizing this kind of the issues, especially territorial issues. So if we can consider those problems step by step, I think the future would be not so difficultly manipulated by the power, inside Japan at least.
Right, this frosty bilateral relationship will have a difficult time before they can be seriously minded. Last December 28th, gentlemen, President Xi Jinping called on China and Japan to enhance party-to-party cooperation during a meeting in Beijing with a delegation led by Toshihiro Nikai, Secretary General of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party, and Mr. Yoshihisa Inoue, Secretary General of Komeito, LDP's ruling coalition partner. Now, Rong-Ying, has anything fruitful been achieved by this, and what is the current progress of the ruling party's exchange mechanism and its role in boosting the bilateral ties?
Oh yeah, I think the party-to-party interactions, particularly for the ruling parties, the LDPs and the Komeito ones, they are now having over 2/3 of majority votes in the parliament, in the Diet, is very important. It not only, I think, increase the mutual understanding, but more importantly, it, I think, create a better atmosphere for the steady and improvement of the relationship. And as we all know that Nikai-san has been very active and very, I think, strong support of a steady and healthy relationship between China and Japan. So I think he's very well respected, certainly in China, but also I think his voice is becoming louder and bigger in Japanese politics as the relationship is too important. And also I think Abe-san, Prime Minister, is also very much attached to his views in the context of what we have discussed.
The issue, I'm afraid, is whether there is a consensus between the coalition partners of the Japanese cabinet, and whether there is such a consensus for the lawmakers in the Diet about seriously and remarkably improving the strained relationship in this new year.
I think as I can see, there's a consensus that Japan needs to have a stable and a healthy relationship with China.
And do you think this catalyst behind the appeal for improving the relationship actually comes from the U.S. pullout from TPP and AIIB or Belt and Road Initiative? Japan is clearly aware that without this big brother in the Asia-Pacific region assuming the leadership, Tokyo has to reconsider seriously its policy of engagement with China. Andy, do you see eye to eye with me?
I think that is a very important point, that Japan post-World War II has been the junior security partner in the Asia-Pacific region, with the U.S. as the senior partner. But I think maybe what's more important too, when we look at whether there is a consensus in Japan, that I think the initiative actually lies with China. And here the symbolism is very important and matters much more than in a place like the United States, where what Trump says and does may or may not represent U.S. policy. But in China, certainly having Secretary General Nikai speak at the Central Party School is a very important symbol of the direction, I think, that China-Japan relations is going to take, and that's a very positive signal. And you're absolutely right, I think, Yang Wei, that from the Japanese side, there is the reality that with the U.S. being less important in this region, both in absolute as well as relative terms, that I think Japan has to recognize this and accommodate itself to these new geopolitical realities.
But the issue of mistrust captures headlines. When you spoke of a political foundation which were laid by the 4 official documents over the past 3 decades, does it mean that we should take the conflicting signals from the Japanese government very seriously? They not only say, hey, buddy, we want to improve relationship with you, but during the process of geopolitical reconfiguration following pivot to Asia, Junichiro Koizumi in particular called for the building of an arc of freedom and prosperity, which means members of this arc should share the same values. China is obviously an exception. Therefore, we have been excluded from this club. So the Japanese government has always sent conflicting signals.
Oh yeah, I think the importance of these 4 political documents, why we say they constitute the political foundation, is because, number one, there's, I think, within, ever since the 1972, the normalization relationship, and up to 2008, within that 30 years and more, the 2 countries has worked out some very important principles how to manage the relationship. I mean, 2 neighbors, big neighbors, which have difficult history and various kind of problems. This is very important because this is always there. I mean, among them, I think from Chinese perspective, it also to some extent Japanese side also agree is that how to implement, as you rightly said, with deeds, not words, about the consensus that the 2 sides view each other as a partner for cooperation, not as a threat to each other's development. And more importantly, the 2 sides actually has agreement on consensus that they had support each other's peaceful development. And this is the most important thing, I mean, between the 2 countries on the question of mistrust or distrust. And if the 2 sides were able to solve this problem, particularly the Japanese side, as the overall balance of power is changing, China is taking over Japan in terms of overall GDP, I think this issue becomes increasingly important and prominent. And I think when Japan says, something, the Chinese would like to look at what it does. It is doing something. So the past few months, particularly I think after in the later part of last year, 2017, we have seen some words coming out, statement by Prime Minister himself and others. But we are watching. We are watching. I see China is watching. But the other equally important thing is the history issues and other issues. How they can, again, there's a commitment. There's also, I think.
But I'm afraid, gentlemen,
a
lot of the Chinese observers and overseas observers say, hey, you cannot afford to be always mired in your historic memories. You have to move forward. You have to look forward into the future. Now, let me cross over very quickly to Professor Watanabe. Hello.
Hello. Yes.
I believe you've been listening to what we are talking about in the Beijing studio.
Right, yes.
Do you agree that the Abe administration has sent very conflicting signals and opinions, not only in the Diet, but across the spectrum of the public opinions, have been very seriously divided? Do you have a series that agrees to take China seriously, that agrees to take the bilateral relationship very seriously?
You see, the people or academics out of Japan may understand that the LDP of Abe's party is so strong, but actually the number of votes in the last election, about the two-thirds majority voted for, you know, in reality, the opposition parties. But because of the some distortion of the voting system, that kind of phenomena happened. So Abe's, you see, majority supporting rate is not, you see, showing the strength of the Abe's political party itself. This is the first thing. Second thing is that, you see, when I first visited China in 1971, you see, I met with our colleagues of the table tennis team. I met the Premier Chou En-lai. He said, you see, if Japan apologizes the damages given by the war, we don't request Japan to pay the compensation money. This is the principle of the relations between China and Japan. So I am very much optimistic if the people would show clear attitude to be friendly more with the Chinese people and Chinese government. And so the Premier Abe and President Xi Jinping, if they can talk very friendly, seriously on the basis of the spirit of the 40 years ago, I think the relations of the two countries would be very, very good.
Thank you so much, Professor Watanabe. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Rong Ying, Mr. Andy Mark, and Professor Watanabe. We are addressing prospects of this most important bilateral relationship in Northeast Asia between Tokyo and Japan, because this year, 2018, marks the 40th anniversary of the Peace and Friendship Treaty, which was signed 40 years ago between the two governments. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. A few minutes ago, Professor Watanabe said that the principle the Chinese government and Chairman Mao Zedong put forward during the Cold War was very, very, and would say, decisively important for normalization of the relationship. That is, China decided to give up the demand for compensations, the war indemnity. It seems on the official surface, the Chinese authorities seldom mention the issue of the compensation. But individually, some of the Chinese went to Tokyo and with the help of Japanese lawyers are still fighting for compensations for their victimhood during the war. Do you think this has somehow prevented the Japanese authorities from moving forward?
I think the issue, this is part of the issue of history. As I said, there's a position. This is being proved that this is important, and it followed the principles. I mean, the history the question of history would be properly managed and resolved. And then related, there are some issues left over, I mean, related to the history. The compensation is certainly one of them. There are the other issues related to that. How to manage these issues, I think this is also there between the two governments and also between the parties concerned, including individuals, can be resolved. But the Japanese keep on, but some of the Japanese, particular politicians, keep on, I mean, whitewashing or denying the part of history. These issues, sensitive issues, will keep on coming back.
Particularly remarks from the right-wing politicians in Japanese politics.
Yeah. So I thought that the two governments...
Their tributes to the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors 14 Class A war criminals, kept harming the fragile relationship, leading to the deep mistrust between not only the two governments but peoples. However, right-wing politicians cannot represent the majority. Having said this, what do you make of the campaign to rewrite the pacifist constitution? Will that pave the way for the rise of a right-wing nationalists in Japan, and therefore, do you think the issue of militarism will again make a comeback to the media?
Well, I think one would certainly hope not. But I think where some of this mistrust comes from is actually structural, because, of course, one of the differences between Japan and China is the system of government. So it's much more difficult for a country like Japan to stay at a position and stick to it. Just like the United States, whenever there's a new administration, you can have 180-degree policy shifts, which makes that country a less reliable partner, and in that sense that can create a sense of mistrust. So I think we need to recognize that. Then you have these fringe elements that hopefully we can see in Europe, other parts of the world, while they have gotten greater recognition and some traction, but it seems like that it might not be as widespread as many fear, and hopefully that will be the same in Japan as well.
Let's look at the issue of a military build-up and the arms race in Northeast Asia. Obviously, China wants to become a maritime power. Look at the boom of maritime commerce, and we have become the biggest trading power in the world. And part of that, the alleged Chinese ambition, and the West would call that maritime assertiveness, is our very tough position on territorial disputes like the Diaoyu Islands and the Nanjing Line in South China Sea. So my question for Professor Watanabe is, do you think the regular military drills by the PLA poses a threat, quote-unquote, to your national security? And do you think this alleged threat has been abused by the Abe administration to arouse nationalist sentiments, to lay groundwork for rewriting the pacifist constitution and to give up Article 9?
As far as the Komeito party has the strong power or influence upon the Abe politics, he cannot do anything. So this time, I see, as you have discussed already in your studio, Komeito and one of the section leader of the LDP, Ikai-san, went to China. And they said, you see, the importance of the relations of the two countries. But Mr. Abe want to, you see, extend his term next year for another 2-3 years. So if he wants to do that, he needs the support of the Komeito. So he doesn't want to change, actually, the constitution, especially Clause 9.
Thank you so much. Rong Ying, at the end of 2017 last year, the Chinese Air Force held frequent drills and training missions at Tsushima around the Sea of Japan, while the Chinese Navy have passed several strategic streets like the Miyako Strait. Are Chinese military drills, they are provocative or uncomfortable from a Japanese standpoint? I should have asked Professor Watanabe, but what's the position of the Chinese scholars?
No, at all. No, not at all. I think the Chinese military has been conducting normal and routine exercises, and the passaging of these straits within the international law, I mean, to the right of international law for passages like that. So I don't think this is an issue from Chinese perspective. Of course, Japanese has some concerns. And I think it would be right if the Japanese military and the Japanese or department concerned to share, to convey if there are any concerns or questions, and through right channels, diplomatic and others, rather than through, I think, public media like microphones. And that is not the right way for that. But otherwise, I think China, as a country that is undergoing a kind of dramatic changes, and it is undertaking the military modernization program, so it's only natural, I think, for China's military going out, going far, and going more frequently. I think the problem for Japan is that it has to make sure to get to use that.
The last question for Rong Ying. What do you think of the U.S.-Japan Security Pact that allegedly covers the nearby waters, which means Taiwan Strait?
U.S.-Japan military alliance is in a history. It is, I mean,
But it is also reality.
And it is now become a reality. And the question, I think, from a Chinese perspective is that how this alliance is going to provide goods, public goods, in terms of the security, stability, and the prosperity of the region. Now the question is, this is a big question mark. It is increasingly, I think, creating, instead of goods, for me, is bad, because they are on the one hand, they take it as a kind of a mean to ensure or to maintain their dominance in the region, and increasingly perceived as against China. So I thought the question of Taiwan is, of course, this is where, I mean, comes into this equation, all right? And China, being very clear, this is part of China, and China, I think, feels, I mean, even though we are pursuing a kind of a peaceful development across the strait, peaceful reunification, but I think China knows very well the danger and of independence. So this is, but so if the alliance is perceived, I think, as a kind of agenda or the kind of strategy against that will could become very problematic.
Repeatedly, the two sides of Washington Tokyo said the Security Pact serves as a cornerstone for the regional security in Northeast Asia. However, the DPRK says it doesn't have the security assurance from the hostile countries on the doorsteps. Instead, it decides to possess nuclear weapons for self-protection. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue, addressing the prospects of a China-Japan relationship in the year 2018, which will witness the 40th anniversary of the Peace and Friendship Treaty, a very important landmark document that lays the groundwork for bilateral relationship. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.